Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Turning Compliance into Competitive Advantage, How to Reduce Risk, Improve Operations, and Win with Data. I love this topic that we're talking about today because time and time again, we're hearing it from the customers that Cascade works with. They've made these investments in collecting emissions data. They're reporting that data periodically. It's a big effort for them. And they know that they can wring more value from this data beyond compliance, but they don't quite know how to unlock it. For businesses today, you're facing a lot of uncertainty. There's been growing and ever-changing regulatory requirements around emissions data. You're facing increased and changing customer demands around what you're doing with decarbonization. And what we've seen is that companies have responded by making big investments in the systems that collect and report this emissions data. But at the end of the day, compliance is really the primary driver for what they're doing. So what if this data could do more than just check a box for your business? What if it could be a tool, an asset for transforming your business? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to explore how forward-thinking companies are shifting their mindset from compliance as a cost center to data being a catalyst, an advantage for creating operational improvement, for driving risk reduction, and for ultimately creating market differentiation for their business. We've put together an awesome panel of experts today. These are folks that are working with manufacturers and industrial organizations every day to help them unlock that full potential of their emissions data, so that businesses can go from reporting to taking action and from obligation to opportunity. So before we dive in, let's go ahead and go around the room and do some introductions. I'm Josh Bachman. I'm the Vice President of Customer Engagement here at Cascade Energy. Cascade Energy has been in business about 30 years, and our business is helping companies decarbonize. We focus mostly on the industrial sector, but we also work with commercial buildings and ag operations. We deliver utility, energy efficiency, and demand response programs. And then we also work with enterprises to help them deliver an emissions or energy program across their enterprise. Alex, can you go next, please?
Certainly. So my name is Alex Semino-Hurt. I'm a senior engineer in Cascade's market transformation team. And I'm excited to talk to folks today and share some learnings that we've gotten from this process. And I'll pass it on to Jinsey.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jinsey Oman, and I'm the product director for Gazebo at Cascade Energy, where I've worked for over 11 years now. Gazebo is our energy management platform designed to help organizations track performance, manage projects, and use data to drive operational decisions. Our goal is to make energy and emissions data useful, not just once a year, but as part of a continuous improvement process. At Gazebo, we also work with utilities and consultants to build and manage commercial and industrial energy and carbon management programs at scale. So I'm really excited to be here today and to share some thoughts, but also to learn from my fellow panelists. I'll pass it on to Andrew.
Thanks, Jinsey, and thanks so much to everyone for joining. I'm Andrew Hoffmeister. I'm a senior researcher on the industry team at ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. I work primarily on industrial electrification and our intelligent efficiency work streams. ACEEE is a nonprofit research organization. We develop transformative policies to reduce energy waste and to combat climate change. With that, I'll pass it on to Josh.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh Brueggemann. I am the co-founder and managing partner at Fresh Coast Climate Solutions. We're a sustainability and climate consulting shop, and we are excited to be part of the Cascade Energy family now. So excited to be here today and speak with you about our experience working in the industry and share some of our lessons from working with a whole range of clients across different industries and what they're facing.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive in here. So, Andrew, really happy to have you here. ACEEE, you have a unique perspective in terms of both the policy and regulatory landscape here in the US and abroad. And I'm hoping that you can, sort of frame up this panel discussion in terms of what ACEEE is seeing in the market these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about that. To give a few minute level set on domestic climate and efficiency regulation policy and market landscape is definitely to forego some of the nuance that's it's intrinsic to particular states and particular industries. But what I can do is focus on broad trends and how those interact with data needs and where I'm seeing opportunity to leverage existing pathways for more robust long-term outcomes. So as you can see on this slide, a number of states have established long-term climate goals. This is not news through various levels of governance, legislation, or executive targets, as you see labeled there, or both. Though what that means exactly differs by state, the type of target, a number of other factors. It gives us a baseline understanding of some of the regulatory tailwinds. A number of states create regulation as well as incentive programs and other policies justified by adherence to long-term GHG targets. Some of these states have made progress to those goals, others have not. New York, for example, just to pull one, cites the impetus for some of their funding programs as the New York Climate Act, and others do the same. Next slide, please, Brooke. So industrial electrification is just one pathway that industries can take towards energy saving and greater efficiency in manufacturing. But I think it serves as a pretty good barometer of progress in some cases, because net zero goals are impossible to reach without alternatives to natural gas and other fossil fuel fired industrial process heat. There's growing momentum behind state policy and program driven electrification. A number of PACE programs can be used for industrial electrification, while other funding programs like RISE PA and NYSERDA's heat recovery project development offer millions of dollars for direct implementation of emerging electric technologies. Now, this map is not an exhaustive list, but is meant to be illustrative of the momentum behind electrification and progress towards the decarbonization goals outlined in the previous slide. And I wish we had the time to go into more detail on each of these, but maybe in a subsequent conversation. Next slide, please. So successful applications to some of those funding sources, though, and the design of effective new regulation from a policymaker perspective requires in-depth knowledge of both the market, the technology, and in addition to facility level process heat, waste heat needs, space constraints, water use, etc. Building a business case agnostic of emissions and energy savings relies on robust data and then ability to communicate that data to utilities, to state energy offices, to engineers, implementers, technology suppliers. And there are a number of existing pathways of data collection that exist out there in the ether that are important to recognize. They include assessments and energy audits, the broad collection and dissemination of data that come out of those efforts, the industrial technology assessment centers, for example, on-site energy taps, voluntary disclosure programs, such as SBTI, the Science Based Target Initiative, ISO 50001, the International Energy Agency's annexes for high temperature heat pumps and other technologies. Now, these frameworks aren't sufficient alone. Participation in them isn't sufficient alone, especially as some of the federal programs have some uncertainty around them. But they again serve as a starting point of what facility level data collection can look like, how it's been collected before. Standardization is critical to evaluating progress, and some of these pathways can be leveraged to access greater data insights. A company that participates in Better Plants, for example, may have the resources and technical assistance know how to find additional energy audits or assessments focused on a particular process, or look for solutions enabled by a particular technology, or leverage expertise and peer learnings for better outcomes. This data is also used in advocacy at all levels of government. It can be used to better understand market trends, peer efforts, energy saving pathways. The more better data is shared, the better advocacy can help advance the right technologies for the right applications and can help work to mitigate the barriers that exist for implementers. Next slide, please. I think that the key of this, though, is that unpredictability is a key challenge. That's what data collection and standardization aims to ameliorate. End users need to understand technologies, performance capabilities, costs, support, infrastructure needs, emerging regulations in terms of refrigerants, air quality, and emissions, the internal processes that exist, the accessibility of energy assessments and audits, what thermal analysis can actually reveal at a facility, fuel costs and actual consumption, and the future for electricity and natural gas prices. Program administrators need to know best fit applications for piloting new technologies, how to best design programs to lower costs for industrials who are trying to decarbonize, and policymakers need to know the impacts of new tariffs and the other policies and the best pathways for mitigating barriers for the uptake of lower carbon technologies. So data can be used internally to build business cases, to meet corporate goals, to access funding, to future-proof for future regulation and fuel price changes. Externally, it can be used to move the market in the ways that you think it should move, demonstrating technologies that work and mitigating barriers. And with that, I think we're ready to move to the rest of the panel to join me in responding to some questions.
Excellent. Thank you for setting the stage there, Andrew. And thank you for all the advocacy and leadership that ACEEE provides to help us reduce emissions, decarbonize industry, and advance energy efficiency. We're going to now switch over to the panel discussion. I've got a handful of questions that I'll be asking our experts. For those of you out in the audience, we really welcome your questions. My ask of you is to use the Q&A feature here on the Teams platform to post your questions as you have them. We'll have time at the end of this panel to address your questions, and we may be able to sneak in a few here and there as we go. All right, so let's get started. We all know that, again, companies are facing a lot of challenges, both from the regulatory changes that are taking place and customer demands. Where should companies start to address these pressures? What advice do you have to them? Josh Brueggemann, I'm put you on the spot here. What do you think?
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's a few very necessary places people and companies need to start. And a lot of what we're talking about today is shifting from kind of a nice to have to a need to have now. That's very much the paradigm that we're operating in place. And so I think, that starting point is, we're here talking about data today, but just getting that data in place and figuring out internally where it exists, how you can collect it, how you can streamline the data collection process, and then use that data to make very informed decisions. That's an absolute critical starting point. It is going to set you up for success in the long term. From there, you can do some really necessary things to help make your business viable in the long run and resilient. And that's starting to build some type of decarbonization or sustainability program, and then have some goals that are grounded in that data to work against. So those are the starting points. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning that companies are facing pressure from kind of all different directions right now. In addition to the current economic climate, there's pressure from customers to do more and to help them meet their climate goals. That's a very real thing. There's pressure from investors, and of course we have the regulatory and the regulations now, whether they're in the U.S. or even across in Europe. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're in one of those states. You're part of a global or domestic supply chain. And so those regulations are definitely reaching across state lines and across country lines right now.
Josh, what's an example maybe of a regulation that some of the folks you're working with are currently wrestling with?
Yeah, one example, I was working with a small trucking company in Southern Ohio. And so there's no state regulation there, but they have two clients, one of which was having them do scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emission inventories. And that's in relation to the California SB 253 regulation. And then they have another client, they're trucking their product around the US to sell into the retailers. that is a European-based company, and so they're also having to report into what's called CSRD in Europe. And so I think that's a great example, because even for me as a professional in the space, that was kind of one of the least expected places to find a company having to navigate these different regulatory requirements and work with their customers and then report out. But it's definitely happening.
Great, great. Open to the panel. I'm curious other people's thoughts around challenges that businesses are facing, both from a regulatory and customer demand level, and how you advise them to start addressing that pressure. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I don't like framing in terms of barriers necessarily. Unfortunately, I still think it's largely necessary in many cases to start this conversation. But the challenges being faced are many. Uncertainty in terms of refrigerants, air quality regulations and how those will change over time, emissions and the scopes of those emissions, who will be held accountable to goals and targets, and who owns the emissions that are distributed throughout the supply chain. I think that's a really great question. What are the best technologies to use, and when should they be acquired in a way that opens up the implementing company to the least amount of risk without waiting too long to meet goals? If there's some availability for an industrial heat pump, should a company install one now or wait for a better steam generating heat pump that may be available in 3 to 4 years? And I think the first steps to answering some of those questions, just to echo some of what Josh B said, but it's engagement in data and community, trying to understand as best folks can what's available and how and when it's available, and what are the right times to consider new technologies and electrification. Energy efficiency practices are pretty well known, and they're consistently available and relatively low cost. But what more can companies do? There are groups in the market to talk to. There are low cost energy audits and assessments that are pretty widely available that provide direct recommendations for decarbonization and energy savings pathways. There are technical assistance resources for accessing new practices and new technologies. And there are pretty good means of accessing some level of market data and understanding technology efficacy in different applications.
Got it. Yeah, one of the buzzwords I've been hearing these days in the market is a no regret strategy. Regulatory requirements are changing, customer demands are changing. It's a little bit uncertain what companies should do. And so what are those no regrets type tactics that companies can take, where not only are you reducing emissions, but you're generating cost savings, you're creating resilience within your organization, you're improving your brand, or you're achieving reputational gains. So I think that really resonates with me as a good strategy in these times. And maybe later on in the panel we can talk a little bit more about what some of those tactics are that companies can take. Let's jump to the next question here. Alex, this one's for you to start out with.
Okay.
How can companies leverage this data to drive additional value within their organization? How can they take advantage of the data they're collecting to do more than compliance?
Yeah, I think any successful company is going to have some way to manage their processes in their own data. And emissions related data, energy related data is another approach to that. And I think one of the best ways you can do that is you can partner with an organization to help you through a discovery process. And so a recent example I'm going to maybe share is one of the programs that Cascade has taken on through its market transformation work is a DOE program called Technical Assistance Partnerships. And we are managing a regional center that provides technical assistance to industrial sites, particularly in the Upper West. And we're able to provide no-cost technical assistance to industrial sites trying to explore and understand their site data and trying to answer particular questions. And a really neat example that happened in the last couple of months was we're working with a Utah site, a Utah manufacturer, and they have very aggressive decarbonization goals across multiple sites throughout the organization. And scope 2 emissions, I think people have they're readily understood strategies for tackling scope 2 emissions. But scope 1 emissions, particularly if you have some carbon intensive processes, can be really challenging to tackle. And so we did an on-site energy generation screening for this site. And through the process of understanding how they use energy, how they emit, what processes emit what, we discovered that actually there was a really great opportunity. And that opportunity was for them to generate their own hydrogen on site for use in one of their processes. And they could do it cleanly and more cheaply, it turned out, than their local gas supplier. And to add to that, this was a process where they were kind of dipping their toes in using hydrogen as a part of this process. But up until that point, they'd been using methane to get that hydrogen. So they're burning natural gas to get the hydrogen in that process. And that now they realize, well, we can get hydrogen cheaper and more cleanly than we can get from our gas supplier. We can produce it ourselves, so we have our own kind of control of that resource. And now we can kind of take a deeper dive into scope 1 decarbonization at our site. So they're investigating that and implementing that at their site. They're pairing that with some other on-site energy generation, and then they're going to take it other places. So I would encourage people to really think of it as exploring that data is a discovery process, and you're going to find some pretty phenomenal things.
I like it. Thank you, Alex. I mean, Jinsey, with your role on the Gazebo team and platform, you're immersed in data. What have you seen from companies in terms of value that they've been able to wring from their data beyond compliance?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. For many companies, compliance is the first sign that all their energy and emissions data is pulled together in one place, and it's often a real eye-opener. So what begins as a task to meet ESG or CDP or other regulatory requirements, it often uncovers insights with far greater potential than just meeting compliance. That, like you said earlier, the same data can do more than check a box. It can drive data-informed decisions and strengthen accountability and make operational improvements. So from our experience working with Gazebo customers, this is how we've seen compliance data become a foundation for continuous improvement. Like some of the examples, there are a lot of uses for this data, but some of the examples is, uncovering hidden inefficiencies. So when granular data can reveal patterns that utility bills can miss, right? Like a customer discovered that their equipment's running all weekend, an insight that only emerged after aggregating granular data. So fixing it delivered real measurable savings for them. The other way we've seen organizations use this data is to drive accountability at the facility level. So when performance data is broken out by location or by business unit, teams can benchmark and take ownership of their processes. We've seen Gazebo dashboards prompt friendly competition and focused attention on where it's most needed. The other way we've seen facilities and organizations use this data is to prioritize investments based on impact. So centralized data helps teams model their ROI and not just make investment on upgrades based on guesswork. By layering in cost and usage trends, customers can identify which upgrades will deliver the biggest payoff. And the big one is aligning people and teams and building executive support within organizations. When data is framed around business goals like reliability and resilience and cost savings and productivity, it earns trust across the organization. We've seen teams use compliance data to tell a stronger story, gain budget approval from their leadership, and keep emissions and decarbonization efforts interwoven with their operations. Compliance is often the first step, but the real opportunity is turning that data into a feedback loop and connecting their goals with actions. And you're already doing the hard part, which is gathering the data. So with the right tools and the right mindset, this data can become a leverage for better decisions, making your organizations more resilient, more efficient, and drive stronger engagement across your organization.
That's great. That really resonates with me, Jinsey. I mean, one of my mantras that I tell companies all the time, they want to talk about the technology. What sort of equipment, what technologies can we implement to reduce our emissions? And what I've learned over the years is that this is 90% about people and 10% about technology. And data is fundamental to how you educate people within your organization, how you build that engagement, how you create that culture that understands and embraces how to reduce emissions within the company because it's a strategic advantage. So, Jinsey, we're gonna stick with you here because we've got more questions on data.
Hey Josh, can I jump in
go.
real quick? And
By
I just
all
want to
means, of
piggyback
course.
on what Jinsey said about using data to make really good informed decisions. And so we just completed a project with a major outdoor manufacturer in California, and we did an emissions profile for them, and they have approximately 200 suppliers. And so by using that data, we were able to narrow down 10 of those 200 suppliers comprise over half of their scope 3 profile.
Mhm.
And so that's a great example of where, like, until you get that data foundation in place and you're able to look at your entire operation, then you can really channel your time, resources, and money on how you're focusing your activities.
Gotcha. It's a sea of opportunity, and you need to know where to target. So on the data question, it's 2025, and I find it remarkable how challenging it is after all these years to collect good data. Jinsey, can you talk a little bit about why is it so hard to get good centralized data, and how can companies overcome that challenge?
Yeah. So the challenge starts with the fact that no one team owns all of the data that's needed to make decisions in an organization. Facilities team may hold the meter data, sustainability teams own the emissions data, finance and accounting pay the bills, and operations teams actually know what's happening and changing on the ground. So these data sets are siloed, they're tracked in different systems and tools, and they're rarely structured for sharing because outside of the context it's not really valuable outside for other operations. And it's really hard to get a full picture, let alone a trusted picture. Many companies, they jump straight to automation. But in our experience, I feel like that often leads to frustration. As a technologist, as much as I love automating systems, that may not be the first step in this process. Instead, start by streamlining, map out where your most critical data lives, understand how it's collected and updated, understand the context of that data, and begin with lightweight ways to bring it together. Some examples, lightweight examples to get started. Set monthly reminders to download data from your utility portals, from your ERP systems and energy systems, or like lightweight scripts or shared folders that can help you get started by dumping data into one place without a full integration. We've seen teams create scorecards or shared dashboards with just a few manual inputs to get started, and that's often enough to spark that conversation and build that momentum. And that once you build that foundation of trust and visibility, then you can start layering in automation analytics. That's where we start with Gazebo. It's like create that shared picture first, so everyone can understand and work from. And once data is streamlined, start the task of automation. And once you start that task, you're going to identify gaps where data gathering is painful or inefficient, and that becomes much more obvious. So in our experience, the companies that succeed are the ones that treat data unification as a cross-functional initiative. It's not just a tech problem. It's not just an IT problem. Bring together your sustainability operations and IT teams and have shared goals. And it then becomes much easier to go from a scattered data set to real insights and progress.
Excellent. Thank you, Jinsey. Curious what other folks on the panel, what your thoughts are on this.
Well, I can speak a little bit to some of the maybe upstream of that, prior to working at Cascade, I worked for a number of years at an IOU, an investor-owned utility. And I would say, they were pretty good about data, but they still even had issues in terms of getting that data to their customers, And I had a kind of an inside view on the challenges of that, and it was non-trivial, right? It's one thing to collect that data for your own billing purposes. It's another to have reporting platforms for that. However, I think we should have pretty high standards for any of these utility companies that are selling us this product for being able to report pretty and really nice kind of minute detail on what they're selling us, And then I'll add too is that I think it's going to be getting better. It's definitely getting better in a lot of places where reporting standards have improved, like the green button standard, where in some states that's just mandated, and that forces utilities to sort of figure this out, But there are still large swaths of the country where you could call up your local utility for your site, and they don't even know where to begin to provide you with data beyond the monthly billing that they will send you in a PDF. So that remains to be a challenge, and I think there's a lot of onus on the utilities to figure out how to get good data to their customers.
Yeah, and I can add something here. In addition to the data that drives internal decision making, there's also issues around data that's needed to help inform regulation and development of policy and technology rollout. So I can speak a little bit to that. And the problem and the difficulty around getting good data is primarily proprietary concerns as well as knowledge gaps. There's a ton of data out there, but it's hard to sift through it and know what's actually helpful. From an advocacy and research perspective, we have to make assumptions to answer our questions. We don't have site-specific data a lot of the time because what incentivizes a company to share data? What's the right forum or arena to house it? And what exactly should be collected and by whom? From a company perspective, it's hard to find data on technologies and their applications, others that have saved energy or emissions from the application of those technologies. And to mitigate both of those challenges, I think it's important to identify pathways of data collection that already exist from a market perspective and how to leverage them and how to expand them to enable greater partnership without fear and peer exchange of best practices. And definitely need some champions of industry to serve as excellent case studies and or demonstration sites of new technologies.
Got it. Thank you all. All right, I have one more question here. And so I'm giving the folks out there a little bit of a heads up that after this question, we'd love to answer some of the questions that you out there in the audience have. So now's your chance to get in the front of the line. Please put whatever questions you have there in the Q&A portion of Teams, and we'd love to get to those. All right, so what is your best advice for overcoming roadblocks in advancing long-term decarbonization efforts? What's the best advice that you would give companies facing this challenge? Who wants to take that one first?
I'll take it. Yeah, I have a few things, few nuggets that I'd like you to walk away with. One, as Josh mentioned, go after those no regret decisions. Go after them now. If you have something that you can engage in right now, don't hold back. Second thing is start planning for the long term now. You want to make sure that your business is resilient. It's going to last in the long term, and often that requires engaging in things now while also simultaneously planning for the long term. Third thing, get your data house in order. Making an investment in some time and resources now will pay dividends in the long term by allowing you to be more efficient, more competitive, more resilient, answering all those customer requests, abiding by the regulations, things like that. So it will pay dividends. And then the last thing I want you to walk away with is challenge yourself to do things differently. How can you, as a professional, as a company, kind of challenge the status quo? How can you engage your entire supply chain on your efforts? How can you work with the purchasing department? How can you work with your C-suite or your entire team? Just kind of ask yourselves, how can we do it better? How can we do it differently than maybe how it's being done? Or maybe it's just fine. So I'll leave you with that.
Josh, can you quickly restate those 4
Yeah,
items again?
no regret decisions right now. Start planning for the long term. Get your data house in order and challenge yourself to do things differently.
Perfect. Thank you. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are definitely going to echo Josh's a little bit, but I'll try and think of what I can add. I think we've heard before, but absolutely finding champions is huge at each level of decision making and implementation. Setting realistic goals, understanding timeline and best practices for reaching those goals, and that requires a better awareness of supply chains and technology availability in a lot of cases. And that takes participating in conversations in various marketplaces to help build informed business cases. I think definitely look to leverage and investigate programs from utilities and states that can offset costs. Look to understand non-energy benefits as well. I think that's a big thing that's underexplored. Matching internal company policy with broader company goals, listening to facility level managers and engineers about what's possible, what's needed to make things work, and broadly utility engagement, bringing in as many contexts as you have to keep them clued into your plans and your intentions, reducing the barriers of miscommunication as much as possible.
Thank you, Andrew. Jinsey, maybe from kind of more of like the software platform perspective, what's your take here?
Yeah, thank you for that advice, Josh and Andrew. So when it comes to making long-term progress, my advice would be to start small, but to start smart. Like choose a few pilot sites where energy or decarbonization goals tie directly to real business outcomes. You know, people might be the hardest part of this equation, so celebrate those early wins, build that trust and momentum across the organization. And this might sound a little counterintuitive, but don't make it all about emissions. The organizations that we see that are making the most progress are the ones who connect energy and emissions to business goals, operational efficiency, business resiliency, budget planning, risk management, and cost savings. That's where you can earn that attention from both, leadership, but also at the facility level. Start with a purpose and not a platform. It's really tempting to go search and identify the perfect tool, but that can slow you down. Ask what decisions you want to make with this data to support you. Are you identifying underperforming sites? Are you prioritizing capital investments, tracking performance? Let the use cases lead to your strategy and help identify that platform. Also, you don't have to centralize everything all at once. Start small. Start by unifying the most critical data and then layer other data without going into this process thinking you have to overhaul every single system. And then timely data matters. Not everything has to be real time, but timely and granular data can surface insights quickly and improve responsiveness. So match your data frequency to the decisions you're trying to make. And collaboration is everything, right? Like energy, operations, and sustainability teams, they all hold different pieces of the puzzle. So the biggest breakthroughs happen when they share visibility, have a common language, and have interwoven priorities. And lastly, remember the people. Dashboards can gather dust. Dashboards don't drive change. It is teams drive those changes. So build habits around data. Bring in rituals, monthly reviews, huddles, and storytelling to share information about your data. So when people at the facility level can track and compare performance at their facility level and compare it to and connect it to company goals, that's where the culture starts to shift. I think if I had to sum it all up, it's use what you have, keep it focused, empower your teams, and building incrementally is your friend.
I love that advice to start with the purpose, not the platform, and also start small. And that's, I think, one of the wonderful things about, this whole data piece is that you really can start small and always add on to it. And so that's great advice. All right, Alex, bring us home on this question.
Good Lord. You guys have really covered some great ground. So I think maybe I'll choose to sort of emphasize a few things. One of them is, and this is from the perspective of maybe an organization that's just starting down this path. There are going to be organizations that are at various stages of this decarbonization process and let's say journey. And for ones that are just starting down this path, I think it's really important to think about, okay, if we're going to make change in this organization and understand how we're going to make change, we need to have people at multiple levels of the organization that are championing it. So maybe at the executive level, at the operational level, and all the way down, because everybody's going to be involved in the data collection and the implementation of whatever is understood and figured out and whatever actions arise. So that's one thing, is really multi-levels of champions in your organization driving action. Because what's going to happen, and what we've seen time and again with sites, is they might initiate a process, and if it doesn't get integrated into their operations at multiple levels, a priority arises at this level that kills the action at another level. And so it has to be at multiple levels to make sure you maintain action. And I think really leveraging, there are a tremendous number of resources and organizations out there that can provide you with a path forward. You have to build a path for your own organization, because your organization has some unique operations, but there are so many partners out there that you can connect with that can help you along that path. And so whether it be managing the data itself, whether it be setting good science-based targets for your organization, whether it be understanding, okay, what is the industry doing in terms of this sort of decarbonization process, and what are the standards? There are a lot of partners in this process that can help you with that. And so I encourage you to seek out partners to help you start your way.
Fantastic. Well, my call for questions worked. We've got a few here in the Q&A. Thank you, folks, for putting those in there. Our first question is from Sam Day. Hi, Sam. Thank you for putting this question in. It's a two-part question. I'll go ahead and read it. So first part, do you have any anticipated pathways to put the ownership on the utility to get good quality data to their customers? Green button standards was one mention. There are not many other state or federally mandated initiatives to require utilities to provide high quality data to their customers. That's the first part. Let's go ahead and pause there with that first part. Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll add something, maybe, is that even in states where there are not mandates, the utility landscape is changing in a way that it benefits the utility to be thinking on the level of that interval data. An example I like to talk about when I talk about this is, Rocky Mountain Power. They are exploring virtual power plants, both residential and commercial virtual power plant programs. And that inherently means that they need to be able to have the data available at that level and then have it accessible to the customer so those programs can function. And that is a utility process and program. I see it's benefiting Rocky Mountain Power. They're going, guns blazing into that. And I'm going to see other utilities start to realize, oh, wow, that's a really valuable tool. And once they realize that, they're going to figure out how to get the data piece working.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to jump to the second part of Sam's question. And Jinsey, I'm wondering if you can take this one. So in the decarbonization landscape, how often do you see interval level utility data being a hurdle to taking inventories at an annual level? And I guess, Jinsey, I thought of you on this one because I know, we have folks that gazebo users, some that have interval energy data, within the platform, and others that are relying on, more like monthly bill-based data. And, that might be a good sort of contrast to address Sam's question here.
Yeah, getting utility interval data can be a hurdle. And going back to the question that Alex answered and starting from there, like making friends with your utility IT teams is really valuable, because the care abouts for that IT team is different than what we need the interval data for. So sharing the goals for having those interval data and making that connections at the utility level is really important to help make those connections happen. Yes, interval data is important, but going back to the advice earlier, start with the data that you have available readily. That might be the utility bill data, and start from there, and then go granular. Build up those partnerships within the utilities to get access to interval data.
Got it. Thank you. Next question here. This one's from Julie LaRoche. And Julie asks, are there key roles and an optimal team size you recommend? And Julie, I assume maybe what you're talking about here is if we're talking about like a facility level energy or decarbonization team, what would that look like? That's my interpretation. I'm wondering what folks have seen and what your thoughts are.
I think from a data perspective, it is really important to have champions established. So as Jinsy mentioned, that data can be in a lot of different parts of the organization. It's not that you necessarily need to have a full-time team engaged on this, but having someone that has ownership potentially in each of those different departments that can help with the flow of information is absolutely critical. And then on the other side of that, having some C-suite buy-in and making sure that those champions have direct access to and buy-in from the C-suite is, I would argue, the other like really critical factor. Now, beyond that, depending on the size of the organization and what we're talking about, I think the like size of the team can vary based on the size of the team, and the level of bandwidth required is going to vary based on the size of that organization and how complex they are. You might need a whole person, you might not. It kind of depends.
Anybody else want to add on to this?
I'll add, I think one of the neat things that Cascade does is we run a number of strategic energy management programs. And I think you see in those programs, right? It's kind of like how you focus light, right? If you have a kind of a broader lens and more diffuse focus, maybe you can pull more light in, but you're not necessarily getting a clear picture here. So I always like smaller teams. I'm kind of err on the time of smaller focused teams that have good support. And then if it's a bigger organization, you might have a second one of those that's focused on a second part of that organization. What is small? No bigger than 5 or 6. And that just, to me, that comes down to fundamentally the balance of kind of how the workload is split and how you can communicate regularly. You can communicate with those teams. Bigger than that, and then it starts to get too diffuse. Smaller than that, it's just too much on a particular person's shoulders, maybe in an organization.
I was thinking of there's this. I think Jeff Bezos said the two pizza rule for meetings is like sort of a guideline there, and that's typically about 10 people. And I think when we're talking about an energy team or decarbonization team, it's probably more like a one pizza rule. It's like 4 to 5 people
that
are there. And Dawn Leslie, if you turn your attention to the Q&A, she had a great comment here about it being one person, how that's set up for failure. It's too big of a job for one person. And as we all know, especially now, people change. Time and time again, we work with an energy champion, a decarbonization champion that they're advancing in their organization. They do a great job on that team, and it's a stepping stone for them to do something else within that company. And if it all resides in one individual, well, then it's obviously going to be very vulnerable. And that's where we've seen a lot of teams really struggle when that one key person leaves. So just like anything else, you need diversity, you need backups on those teams to be prepared for the inevitable changes. All right, we have another question here in the chat. So this is kind of going a little bit like what Sam was asking about. Carrie Ann asks, are there any known US level activities to align utilities on a data sharing initiative?
I think the only one I'm aware of is the Green Button Initiative, and it is really up to the utilities to start implementing that and get funding. We know a lot of the California utilities have implemented Green Button, and it has been really valuable for facilities in that territory to get timely data.
And I'll add one challenge, right, is with the larger utilities like investor-owned utilities, they have the resources often to create this internal infrastructure and to align themselves. In any kind of rural part of the country, any country that's served by a network of co-ops, that quickly becomes a challenge because the co-ops are often very small and they might even have they're definitely part of collective organizations, but their data management is at the co-op level, right? And so that presents a fundamental challenge to large initiatives. Is a solution that's going to work for an investor-owned utility over here, it's just not going to work for a system of co-ops.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, which means you have to deal with more of my questions. So one of the things I've been thinking, we've been offering a lot of advice about what to do. But I'm curious, based on our panel's experience, what are some common mistakes you've seen companies make around data? What advice would you give them not to do?
To build off what Jinsey had mentioned before, I think she said, start small, start smart, which I love that mantra. I think the mistake that a lot of companies make is they try to run right out of the gate and let's say go from nothing to implementing a software solution that eventually in the long run may be what they need. But if you go too fast, you're going to create an environment internally where a lot of people aren't going to be very happy because it's very disruptive. And so it's just really important to kind of walk before you run on that front, so you don't interfere with the potential long-term success. We're kind of all talking about a pretty significant paradigm shift in the market right now, where whether it's internal for company operations or we're dealing with larger supply chain data, things are getting digitized and off of paper, out of Excel, and that's a pretty monumental shift.
I've seen companies really add to the iterative costs of scoping out new potential technologies if they haven't done some of the legwork on obtaining early data points through whatever means they can. So I would definitely say that engaging in potential energy audits or assessments or thermal analyses of processes allows for some of those questions to be answered prior to going out and speccing certain technologies.
All right, we have another question in the chat. This one's from Don Leslie. And I think I'm going to answer this one because it'll also, I've seen some things that I have some advice of what not to do. But Don asks, have you seen companies put in their own electric meter and simply get their own data? And Don, we've definitely seen that. Our philosophy at Cascade, what we talk to our clients about is start at that utility meter level. You really want to capture total facility energy use. That's the starting point. Ideally, that's interval data. It's 15-minute data that we're getting in near real time for all the main utility meters at a site. Sometimes that's not possible for whatever reason. And we do have many clients that ultimately choose to put in their own electric meter because for whatever reason, they can't leverage their utilities meter for that application. More commonly, we see businesses, put in sub-metering within their operation. Whether that's trying to isolate the refrigeration system or the blowers at a wastewater treatment plant. It is very common to see folks put in sub-metering at their operation. And, that does lead me to sort of one of some of the advice I would give in terms of what not to do around data. I think, one of the challenges is it's difficult to attach an ROI to putting in a bunch of electric metering at an industrial facility. It's a very expensive and it's a frankly expensive endeavor. And that data has value. It'll present opportunities to you that you can capitalize on that will have a return. But in and of itself, the data may not necessarily have a return. And that can ultimately lead to that investment dying on the vines within your organization. So I think two things. One, like Jinsey said, start small. We don't need to measure everything within the facility. That's expensive. That can cause overload to whoever's responsible for looking at that data. So again, let's start at that utility meter level, capture total facility energy use. And then the other thing is there some action you can take that is going to save you money in conjunction with doing that metering project or improve resilience? Can you couple a metering project with some energy efficiency investments? And that has a return to it. That it's a no regrets things to do. And that total portfolio has a return. And now that metering project isn't standing by itself, maybe in questionable territory. You've attached it to something that has a return to it that can carry it across the line. Any other thoughts on Dawn's question? All right, well, we're about here at time. I'm not seeing any more questions here in the Q&A. Alex, Jinsey, Josh, and Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting and insightful conversation. For the folks that are out there listening, thank you for your time listening to our panel experts. I hope you learned something from them. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have questions, if you want to talk more about some of the decarbonization challenges you're facing. We'd love to engage with you on it. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all and have a good afternoon. Take care.